So 1.8 BP Mazda motor. This one out of a 97 Kia Sephia. And thankfully it has the desirable exhaust headers. Exhaust header singular. Low miles, 67,000 on it. It's been sitting in their warehouse for quite a while. But it's home now. Gonna be dealt with. It has a Kia head on it. Interesting. So I'm going to pull the flywheel off, or maybe it's a flex plate in this case. I don't know. I'll pull it off so that I can mount this face onto the engine stand. And I've got a gasket and seal kit on its way for this engine. So I'm going to tear it down enough to inspect it. I'm sure with this miles it's fine. And clean it, and then probably paint the valve cover and go from there. We're going to swap the 1.6 parts on. For instance, the throttle body will be swapped. The distributor will come over. What else? Well, it's missing the auxiliaries. Those will all come from the 1.6 engine. I believe I'm okay with the injector. I think this is some variable speed thing. It adjusts runner length and the intake. I don't know if I don't think I have the electronics to accommodate that, so that'll get taken off, blocked off, whatever. All right, well, let's get it onto the engine stand. 19 millimeter on that impact wrench. You have to remember that there is some sort of spacer. You don't put that in, I'm sure it's one of those things where the bolts bottom out and you don't get enough compression. All right, so this is held on, but I think we'll just bolt through it to the engine stand. I just got to find long enough bolts. So we bolted through here, up there, there, and down in this corner. Could not bolt through this upper one, but it's in as like a pin. Really can't see through there, sorry. And then these are all very tight. So we've got 4 points of rotation and 3 points of tension. All right, so we'll distributor goes there. All right, we'll get working on this. Be interesting to see what differences, in addition to this head, that are Kia specific. I'll use the same head and valve cover. I'm going to assume the valve cover special. The gasket and seal kit was unique to this Kia based BP engine. The garage is warm and it's time to remove the engine. So I can put in that, which is underneath the cover, a BP 05 engine from a Kia Sephia. Disconnect the battery, drain the coolant and the transaxle oil, remove the hood and front wheels, and then move into this picture. So I'm going to do the first few things now, and I'll bring you back. So the upside of draining the coolant out of the system is I get a chance to clean part of my garage floor. Yeah, there's never an easy way. So I removed the hose off of the, where is it? Back in there somewhere. down underneath there. Sorry, it's just too dark. Anyway, hose off of there, drained it. Now I've disconnected some of the fittings, some of the electrical connections to the fans here and back there. And my next step is to remove the air cleaner. So I disconnect the MAF filter, loosen that. There are probably some other fittings underneath here that I'll have to identify. There's a clip here. And there's a clip back under there. That should allow the whole top to come off. And then there's some screws down underneath there. I guess we can... With the air cleaner out of the way, there was this tube here that goes into the side of the air cleaner. I'm going to remove this intake plenum, which should then give me access to get down in there. I know that has to be removed in order to free up the air cleaner, and that might be the only one. So we'll work on that next. Plenum's off, and I've put these two screws back in so they don't disappear on me. Here's the air cleaner base is off. In this case, I'm now keeping the hardware inside there to not get separated. I'm going to cut the zip ties that are holding the wire and the overflow tube on, and then I'll remove this radiator hose here. Yeah, I'm not willing to climb under there and drain the transaxle fluid yet. So I'm going to finish taking the radiator out of the way. Even if the directions don't tell me to, it's still safe to get it out of there. I just haven't gotten to that point in the direction. So it's just this plate on top that retains it. And again, I've disconnected the two fans. I've got the overflow tubing out of the way and disconnected the tubing end there. So like I said, I'll remove the screws that are holding that on and remove the radiator. Radiator now sitting safely over there. I'm going to remove the hood. So I've got a couple of the screws out with one each in the corner, and then the prop here. My hope is that if I carefully remove that one, the hood will just rest down on its corner. Same thing over here, and then it should be able to, the hood is really light, so it should be safe to remove it by myself. When I'm done with it, I've got it off, my intent is to lay it back here, keep it out of the way. Hood is off. I'm going to remove the strut brace, put it out of the way. Hood's back there. These were the screws. I'm going to screw them back into the hood so they don't disappear on me. I'm still putting off draining the transaxle fluid. So in looking at everything that's left in here, I'd already relocated the battery to the rear, so all of that is gone. Air cleaner's off. Everything that held the radiator in is out of the way. This piece is gone. So now I'm going to work on disconnecting and moving out of the way the power steering pump. So I'm going to start with removing the belt, which is 13, and then 14 is the pump bracket, and that should hopefully free that up. The situation is we've got a hose to the reservoir and a hose to the rack. That's the high pressure hose, and then there's a return hose coming back in here, and those will stay with the rack. If I get them out of the way, then that clears the engine in here. So that's what I'll work on next. Power steering is out of the way. Once I got the belt off, I was reminded that there is a hole in this pulley wheel that lines up with the screw that goes through here, which goes into the bracket. Once I was able to get that more loose, then I got the belt off, like I said. It's 3 bolts that hold that bracket on. On the replacement engine, they look exactly the same. So we have completed the items on the list. Let's go to the next page. Next page says, let's all more on that. Disconnect the harness connectors as shown. So we'll work on that for a while. And beauty of most car manufacturers now is that only one plug will plug into one connector. So we don't have to mark them. So onward and forward. One thing I'll do before I disconnect any more electrical connections is remove this inlet pipe into the throttle body. Loosen that screw, pull that fitting out, and then this hose goes into the intake manifold area there. It's also part of this assembly. So I've backed off the clamp, and two hands will get that one off. Something else I did was I removed, let's see, that screw that was holding that bracket on, which is holding this wire harness to the engine. So that's been disconnected to free that up. And those two are disconnected. The one at the distributor is disconnected. I'll disconnect this one here for the O2 sensor. And then this large one here will need to get disconnected. So at the end of this bracket, which is attached to this wire harness clamp, is a transmission to engine bolt. So remove that so that that frees this whole clamp up, because otherwise I'm going to break something plastic up here. Some of the other wires coming out of this bundle is this ground wire. So I'll remove that. Put the screw back in underneath there to not lose it. I got the O2 sensor disconnected. This one's gonna be in a bugger, but we'll continue working on it. And then this other distributor connection should be off pretty easily. All right, keep going. Our first casualty is this. It's been hardened. Maybe it was always plastic, but I leaned against it not knowing, and it didn't take much to bust it off. But interestingly enough, over here on the replacement engine, it looks like that vent is entirely different. There's nothing that's up there to match that. So I probably would have had to replace this with a piece of rubber hose anyway. The other end of this was in the air inlet going into the throttle body. So right now, working to disconnect the fuel injector connections, which I believe correspond to these across here. On second thought, I don't understand why, and it must not be pointing, because this is the connection to the fuel injectors up there. So I'm looking more closely here, trying to figure out what they've got me. So I need to find that little T and see where those leads go. Maybe it's like behind the engine, under the intake manifold or something. So there's all these connections down in here which go on wires that way. You know, I'm just going to wait until I start lifting the engine out before I mess with any more disconnects. I hate to break a connector that didn't need to be broken. So we're moving on now. Disconnect these hoses. They're showing all in this area. So that's what I will do right now. All right, one thing to remember is the one with white goes on top. And the one without white, or with this kind of heat shield, it's a thicker hose, is on the bottom. I'm not thrilled about removing those heater core clamps. I'm going to remove the other ends here, which are simple clamps. I don't want to break those, and there's no replacement on the other one anyway, so they would have to be reconnected here, so that's where I'm disconnecting them from. So the transmission fluid is draining, transaxle fluid, excuse me. I have sprayed, what did I spray? Deep creep penetrating fluid on exhaust, hardware, that piece there, and I'll let it soak while I'm dealing with the clutch, removing the slave cylinder there, and that's just going to drain. So obviously we're down on the underside now. So a couple hours later, all of these items on the underside are out. Alright, so the axle is out. It goes back up into there. Tie rod had to come loose to get that out, and the ball joint had to come off at the end to come out. I pulled that just to get it out of the way. Disc is under there. Then I also, yeah, there's the drive axle for this side. Let's climb underneath. Okay, so there was a front to back support that's out. The clutch is loose and the exhaust is out. The shifter bars, rods are out. The other side drive axle is out. So, interesting thing, the exhaust pipe that goes into the rear of the catalytic converter, the weld had rotted out all the way around, so it was just in there with a slip fit. All right, let's see what's next. All right, step 5, take the engine out. Actually, in this case, the whole drivetrain. So there are a couple of engine mount bolts around there that come out, actually 4 of them, and then that stays with that mount. And then on this side, you take these 2 out once the engine is supported, and then you disconnect that bolt, and it's mating down on the other side, and this whole piece here comes out, and that should free the engine and transmission just to lift straight out. Looks like I'll probably need to get that out of the way. Well, they don't tell you need to, so maybe when you're supporting the engine over here, the engine tilts enough, then you can kind of maneuver it around this. Just have to be careful. And I know I still have some electrical connections somewhere up in there that I need to deal with. If nothing else, then this ground will need to come out of the way. The engine is now being held by the hoist. I've removed the 4 screws in this engine or transmission mount area. I've just disconnected these 2. So positive is to the front. I'm sorry, they're both positive. The red wire to the front, the black wire that goes to the starter is in the rear. And we'll just keep taking things apart. Alright, let's walk around here and see where we're at. So once I took out the nut back there, it allowed this engine mount to rotate because I had already removed those 4 screws, which are back here. I went ahead and disconnected this screw up here after having taken out the overflow bottle, which is now up on the ceiling. All right, coming around to the other side. That one took, so remove the engine mount piece by 2 nuts off of here. Then there were some weird cup-shaped washers. And then there was a through bolt coming from this way with a nut capturing it on the back side. And that engine mount is right there. So the engine is loose. It's lifted up some. It appears that once I get this wire bundle disconnected in the back, I know one of them is the, down in the depths there is the speedometer sensor. So I get that, then the engine should be free. Oh yeah, I was able to move the clutch slave cylinder out of the way because it's a flex back underneath there. So, like I said, everything appears to be ready to go once I get that cable bundle disconnected from up in wherever it goes there. Alright, so yes, back in there, the speedometer is undone. That white wire right in the middle, that is my push button start. And then back in there, you can kind of see that spotted tube. Yeah, I forgot about that. Unfortunately, I didn't rip it off. That is my oil pressure gauge. So it's had the zip ties snipped. And I'll zip tie one more here. And hopefully I can get this engine up high enough, because it's really a struggle getting into where those electrical connections are back in there. So hopefully I've got enough slack up in here to be able to accomplish that. Alright, so I'm going to remove that brace right in there, and that should give me access to get to the starter easier and also deal with that connection up in there and connection to the starter back in there. And then I'll have to deal with the fitting up in there. There it is, the brass fitting for the end of the oil pressure line. So what else did I just deal with here? Oh yeah, taking off the engine mount here just to get this straight. This piece with a bumper on it, it's like a stop against that. It engages with a flat on, there it is, the flat on the stud that's coming out, and that allows me just to pull off the engine mount. It can go up here with the rest. So the last items to get disconnected were 2 connections on the alternator and that oil pressure sensor back up in there above and to the left of the oil filter, and then the back connection to the starter. And I believe that, oh yeah, and I got the oil pressure line loose, and it's now laying on the windshield. So the next step will be to take the transmission off of the engine so that the engine can be mounted on an engine stand. So we'll do that now. Transmission is off. Engine is on the floor. Engine compartment is empty. The engine stand is set up, but issue is I need long bolts with a metric thread that will go into the engine housing, engine block. So I'm going to take this bolt and a measurement for length to Harbor Freight. Actually, I take it to Home Depot or Lowe's and get 4 bolts that will go through and then bolt to the mating threaded holes in the engine block, like I said. So we've got bolts, an assortment here, and a nut and washer on it as well. But first we have to remove the clutch assembly off of the back of the old engine. So impact wrench, sockets, let's get that off there. Alright, before I forget, those were the bolts holding the pressure plate on. Those are the bolts holding the flywheel on. Those are the bolts holding the transmission on. Those were front suspension bolts, and that is the clutch, we'll call it a push rod. So the back of the engine is now empty, and I'll remove that plate, and then I'll be able to bolt up the engine stand holding piece, bracket, whatever. Two engines are side by side now. Sorry for the glare. It's, yeah, pretty white out there.